What is up, everybody? Welcome to Forrest Reviews. I am Forrest, and today we have something different on my channel for the very first time, a group up together session, and we're going to be talking about a very particular set of games that I think you guys might be interested in. In the first segment of Let's Talk, we're going to be talking about two games, and the third one is kind of one we're going to leave off on the sidelines. But the two games we're going to be talking about is Tales of Xillia and Tales of Grace's F. These two games came out for the PS3. The other game that we might dabble into just a little bit is Tales of Vesperia. But here with me is Swordfish1390, his YouTube channel. If you want to check it out, will be in the link in the description. He does reviews as well.
Yo, how's it going, guys?
We also have a very popular YouTuber as well who does really good reviews, excellent content, really good co-op reviews as well. Shintai Reviews, if you want to check out his channel, links in the description.
Yo, what's up?
And also here is another guy who's really popular. Peter, thanks for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.
Alright, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the video. Let's talk about these two games, guys. Now, I know for many of you out there who are probably wondering about this video, what does it entail? Well, with regards to the release of Tales of Symphonia Chronicles, which if you guys have not heard about those two games in the past, they were released as far as two consoles. The first game, Tales of Symphonia, was released on the GameCube, and Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World was released on the Nintendo Wii. Unfortunately, with the Wii version of Symphonia 2, it didn't sell as well. It did sell pretty decently, but not as well as it should have. The first game was hugely successful. Now that this is coming out for PS3, for many of you guys who have never played a Tales game, I think it's safe to say that there are a bunch of games out there that you guys should check out in the Tales franchise. But we're going to just pretty much narrow it down to the last two released games. And with us here, we need to give you guys an honest opinion of which ones you should play first if you're new to the series. If you're starting out with one that isn't too hard or too expensive to pick up. I actually want to mention briefly Tales of Graces. Graces is actually a game that was originally on the Nintendo Wii. It was ported to the PS3 later on. Beautiful graphics and a great combat system. The whole premise of this particular game is involving around friends growing up, learning about each other through some backstory, but eventually it goes into their adult stage in life where they are still friends even when they separated for some years and they haven't talked to each other for quite some time. They get that understanding back in the game of how important friendship really is. And I don't know about you guys, but do you guys feel a kind of simplistic story for some people out there to get into a Tales game? Would you feel this may be one of those kind of games to start with?
Graces isn't the most accessible game in the series. I'm not sure if it's like the best place to start. I'd say for a newcomer, I think Xillia is the most accessible one because Graces kind of ditched out all the traditions that were from, not all, but a lot of the traditions that we're familiar with. The combat has been completely revamped, the leveling system. I feel that one is catered more towards veterans in a lot of ways. It's not a terrible place to start or anything. I mean, it's a good game, but I think its mechanics are a lot more intricate in comparison to the rest of the game. So I'm not sure if I would personally say that Graces is the best place to start.
That is a good point, but we do need to mention the brief summary of the story. Of course, you guys have been more involved into the Xillia games than I have. Story, what do you think about the story? If you maybe want to enlighten us on that too. Personally, I'm still kind of diving into the game right now. Would you say that the story in Xillia would be, I guess, more catered to first-time viewer playing a Tales game over Graces then?
First, for me, I think that Xillia has probably the darkest narrative in the series so far anyway. I heard Xillia 2 was darker, but that I've played, Xillia is easily one of the most, I guess, like more adult stories in the series. Like it has a lot of dark themes. The characters are a lot richer. I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with this one being your first game story-wise because it's very interesting, compelling. And even though the final act was rushed, and that's why we have a sequel, so hopefully the sequel will patch that up. But story-wise, yeah, I'd say this is not a bad place to start at all.
I think that for a lot of you out there, combat is important if you're going to play a JRPG. And typically, when you set aside two games such as these, it's interesting to see that there are some big differences between these two games. And I guess to start off with this segment, Shintai, would you say, based on these two games for viewers out there, what would you see in combat to be a recommendation first?
I think Sword hit the nail on the head when he said that Graces is more technical and Xillia is more streamlined. So I would say in terms of combat, if you're the kind of person that really gets into like really deep mechanics, if you like getting in really nitty gritty with all the different mechanics and figuring out how all the different things work, Graces might be more your style. If that sounds too overwhelming, that isn't to say that Graces isn't a bad place to start if you're focused more on the combat. But if you want something that's a little more easier to get into, something that is a little more of a smooth transition, I would say Xillia is better. Now, Graces' combat feels more like a revamp compared to other games in the Tales series, while Xillia has a lot of what makes Graces good and what makes older games good. So I feel that with Xillia, you're not only getting more of a streamlined kind of battle system compared to Graces, which was much more technical, but you're also getting a battle system that has things that are new in it, but also has elements in it that are reminiscent to older Tales games, as opposed to Graces, which is much more different by comparison.
That is very true. And actually, to bring up something about Xillia that we did not mention yet is the approach of having two characters who you can play their sides of the story. Two different stories and seeing two different perspectives from two different characters. Now, granted, the game and the story essentially is mostly the same with some small variants added in. I really feel that as far as Xillia is concerned, there is that extra added replayability. Because essentially you have this open world where you can do a lot of side content in the game, as well as getting more intricate with the battle system itself. Whereas Graces is more, I wouldn't say complicated, but a little more complexity involved with how the game is played. It reminded me a lot of Abyss in many ways when it came down to its combat. To each his own, but I do see some similarities to it. Overall, I think the game does have some pretty intricate things going for it in Xillia. And also, I think the character depth is a little more interesting with Xillia. The cutscenes themselves are more open and vibrant with more detail. And I think this is the first Tales game that had more depth and perception in the cutscenes than some of the older games. More of the older games had more of a still shot approach, you know what I mean? Like, unless it was an anime cutscene, which was few and far between in the older games, the cutscenes in this game, in Xillia, are vibrant, colorful, beautiful.
The animation studio that handled the anime cutscenes in Xillia was Studio Ufotable. Typically, the studio that handles the anime cutscenes for Tales games is Production IG. Production IG is mostly known for the Ghost in the Shell series. They also recently did Attack on Titan, but Studio Ufotable is known for Fate Zero, Kara no Kyokai Garden of Sinners, as well as the Tales of Symphonia OVA. Personally, I think that Ufotable is a more talented animation studio in terms of the shading and the coloring, the quality of the animation. Honestly, I think the only Tales game that has even close to the quality that Xillia has in its anime cutscenes is probably Tales of Vesperia, but I would say Xillia, as well as Xillia 2, easily have the best looking anime cutscenes in the Tales series.
Well, now that we've basically given you guys some kind of brief description between the two, this is not a review, it's more or less just talking about these two games and just kind of opening your eyes up a bit if you have never played a Tales game before. If you have, might be a place where you can comment on how you feel about someone starting out in a Tales game with these two for the first time. And I honestly think, for me, and I'm going to give the other guys the floor so they can give their honest opinion, me personally, after playing both of these games, I personally would start with Graces. And I only say that because I honestly feel that the game has kind of a really cute charm to it. And I think the depth in the characters themselves, going from their kind of child approach to their adult approach, getting to experience them from their like innocent youth to having more issues in the world that's going on around them and having to meet up again after so long and seeing how much has changed over them from when they were a kid to when they were an adult, I think it's a pretty cool thing to see in the Tales game. And to my knowledge, I don't think this has ever been done before in that kind of style. What about you, Sword? What would your recommendation be?
Personally, between Graces and Xillia, I think Xillia is the better one if this is your first entry in the series. Not only because of its streamlined approach, like if you're new to action RPGs in general, Xillia is not a bad place to start because the game is really easy. Honestly, you really don't have to try unless you're playing on like a really hard difficulty. So if you're not experienced in the Tales series, difficulty-wise, Xillia is a perfect place to start. And yeah, the game is a lot more linear in comparison to the other ones, so Xillia is probably the best way to go.
What about you, Peter? What is your opinions on this?
I would say Tales of Xillia is the better choice for newcomers, not only because the combat is more streamlined, not only because it's easier, but also got a few nuances to make it more accommodating to new players, like fast travel. The tutorials are pretty in-depth, mostly streamlined without dumbing down the mechanics from past Tales games.
What about you, Shintai?
In terms of the story, I think Graces is a better choice because the story in Xillia is more complex. If you're not interested in a story where there's more things to keep track of, Graces is a much simpler story. And if you prefer a simpler story, Graces is better. Both have great characters, both have likable characters. But in terms of the story, I think Graces is a much more easier to digest story. But the gameplay is much more technical. And in this way, Xillia wins for beginners for action RPGs. Because the combat in Graces being more technical, the game is also more difficult. Xillia is much easier. Even though you can crank up the difficulty, and in both games you can adjust the difficulty whenever you want, Xillia is generally an easier game. So if you're not just new to the series, but new to action RPGs, Xillia is definitely the better choice, because you might be overwhelmed with Graces. So it really does depend on what you're looking for. I think both, depending on who you are, can be a good choice if you're just starting either with the series or action RPGs.
Would you say both of these games, regardless of whichever one they start with first, are they good choices in the end?
I think they're both of equal quality. I'd say both are equally good games. I'd say between the two, I think not even as far as which one is more accessible. I think Xillia is the better game personally because I like the deeper story. I like the deeper characters. And Graces, don't get me wrong, a simple story, do not mistake simple for bad. That's a common thing that people do is mistake simple for bad. That's not true. I found Graces' story to be pretty interesting. And I love the characters. The characters are usually one of the best aspects of that game. But I think Xillia overall is the better game. I like the darker story. I like the richer characters. But regardless of which one you go for, it's a win-win. Both are great games. You'd be doing yourself a disservice if you don't play them.
I like both games for different reasons, and I really like them both. I would say either one you pick up, you're going to have a good time. Now, whether you like one more than the other, that's debatable. Personally, I prefer Xillia over Graces, but I think both games are still really good. And I think what Sword said was absolutely right. Just because Graces has a simple story doesn't mean it's a bad story. Simple stories can still be charming, and can still be entertaining, and can still be interesting. And I think Graces is all of that. But I do think that Xillia does have a darker, more complex story. And I do appreciate Xillia for that as well. So, like I said, I like them both a lot for different reasons. I think they're both great games.
Both are really good games in my opinion. Graces and Xillia are in my top 3 Tales game. As for which game I would prefer, that'd be Graces F. Why I would recommend Xillia to newcomers just because of how streamlined it is, I would say I really do appreciate Graces F in not only the combat system, but also all the gameplay mechanics. And not only for the gameplay as well, I really do think it has the best humor in the game form. And I really do like humor in video games.
Now, this might come as a shocker to you guys, but I actually did not like Graces at first. Matter of fact, I even kind of told these guys that in the beginning, and it kind of put me off. But I'm the kind of person that it takes several tries for me to see what a game really has to offer. And I think when I look at it this way and I go back to something that I might have put down for a while, I have to kind of open my eyes up to something that I missed before. And I think I personally have to say, from what I have seen on both of these games, when it's differences, especially when it comes down to how, as Peter mentioned, humor, it's always a good thing. It's always a plus. And in Tales games, humor has been there through a lot of the different cutscenes or some of the little boxes that pops up when you're walking around the environments. I have to say, Xillia has a lot of good humor going for it, particularly with the characters. They all are very likable, and I think a lot of them have a lot of kind of mystery behind them. You'll notice that when you play Xillia with one specific character, these guys will tell you that character is pretty mysterious. But in Graces, I think I enjoyed the friendship thing. Even though that kind of bugged me in the beginning, I enjoyed the kind of expression behind friendship, and I think that is the primary thing with that game. And when you see all of the things they have to go through, you will understand why I personally would pick Graces. Combat wise, I have to say that I liked Xillia for having this specific ability where you can combine two characters and you do like these special attacks together. And depending on who you switch with and in the abilities, it is all kind of formulated together to where certain abilities have to line up in a specific way and they do these certain attacks that only these certain characters can do. So it's not like every single character can do the same ability. And in Graces, it's more complex. There's a lot more going for it in terms of different abilities and stuff. And I like the fact that the worlds are all connected together. So when you leave a town, you get to walk this path that leads you to another town. And in Xillia, it's world map traditional. Go around it and you pick this area, and it goes like a dungeon-like area, and you explore this little area for a short while. I specifically like the textured layout of Graces more when it kind of showed how these towns and the environments themselves are connected together. And I thought that was pretty cool. So there are a lot of different variables in these games that I think sways one person to another in terms of which game they will want to play. So you can judge for yourself by seeing the footage you're seeing right now of these two games, which one appeals to you more or less. But the one game we didn't talk about, and I want to kind of leave it off with the last game, which I'll be honest, I don't know too much about, but I want to bring it up anyway, because it's actually one that Shintai and I'm sure Sword and Peter have played. That is actually Tales of Vesperia. Now, the footage you're seeing is probably going to be the PS3 version, unfortunately, because that's the one I have. I don't have the 360 version. Vesperia is considered by a lot of people to be a really good game. Oh, how do you guys feel about Vesperia, I guess in comparisons to the other two games?
Vesperia is easily, for me anyway, easily one of my favorite Tales games. It's actually my top 3. My third favorite. My favorite being Abyss and my second being Xillia. Vesperia is just overall great game. I mean, it's, in my opinion, its flaws are few and far between. The story, while it starts off slow, picks up gradually and it never lets off steam. The characters are amazing. Yuri is a fantastic main character and the combat is just a lot of fun. I mean, I really can't think of too much bad to say with Vesperia, and I do think it's just a real shame that we're probably not going to see the PS3 version, because anyone that likes action RPGs or is already a fan of this series that hasn't played Vesperia, it's a must. Fantastic game, and it's just a shame, like I said, that we're probably not going to see the PS3 version, because Vesperia is just, it's great.
My views will probably be more controversial. Not because I don't like Tales of Vesperia, mostly because I like Graces and Xillia more than Vesperia, which some people are going to take issue with. For Vesperia itself, I think it's a great game. The combat is a lot of fun and got lots of depth to it. It probably has the most combo potential in any Tales game so far. And the characters are, well, the main characters are all great. The visuals are pretty nice. And the story is good. Yeah, good. I probably dislike the story more than my first playthrough, but for my first playthrough, I really liked it. It's just that I see more flaws in the story now, most notably the pacing and the third arc.
I didn't play the story enough in, but I do remember that the pacing was kind of slow, but just from what I've played of it.
Probably one more issue I take with Vesperia is probably its antagonist, which I think is one of the weakest antagonists we got in the Tales game. I think the gameplay, the character interactions via skits, and the story itself is all really nice. It really all comes together, along with the massive amount of content in the 360 version itself. And overall, it's a great game. It's my 4th favorite game in the Tales series, and probably my favorite Xbox 360 game overall. So don't say I don't like Vesperia. I do! I just like the other games better.
Personally, you bring up the slow pacing, and both of you said it, but I actually didn't mind the pacing at all. I didn't really see it as slow. I guess in the main story itself, events didn't happen constantly. I wouldn't say the pacing in Vesperia was as good as Xillia's, where I thought that the pacing in Xillia was really well done. But I didn't mind it in Vesperia because it always did feel like I was entertained by something. Same with Peter though. Vesperia is my number 4. I really like Vesperia as well. And I agree with some of the things that Peter said though, definitely. The villain is not the best. The third act is pretty weak. But Vesperia has a really great cast of characters. Very likable bunch of characters. And probably one of the best main characters in the Tales series. Yuri Lowell kicks a ton of ass. He's basically Batman in a way. He is Vesperia's Batman because he's like a vigilante. Which is awesome because Batman makes everything better. The combat system is basically the best variation of the combat system created by Symphonia. And Vesperia is pretty much the culmination of that foundation, and he does a really good job with it. I really like Vesperia. I would also say it's my favorite Xbox 360 game. It's a really good game. I don't really have that many bad things to say about it. I think Peter said most of the things that I took fault with the game with, and those problems aren't even all that bad. It's a good game. It's a very good game.
One more thing I have to add. I think Vesperia has the best localization in the series so far.
Well, personally with me, and comparing it to Graces and of course Xillia, I have to say I would have to agree with you. I think the voicing in Vesperia was actually done really well. Especially Yuri's character was done quite well. I would say that I will completely agree with.
I think the localization was just fine. It was free of typos. The voice acting was, at least I thought, top notch. I mean, you got Troy Baker, you got Michelle Ruff, you got Wendy Lee. It's just a all-star cast all around. I really can't think of any character that really irritated me. And despite popular belief, Carol's voice actually didn't irritate me. I thought it was a pretty charming type of voice. But like I said, the voice acting is well done. The localization, the text is real nice. No typos, no nonsensical dialogue, no this person are sick like Final Fantasy VII or something stupid like that. Nothing like that. I'd say that the localization was really well done. Thumbs up for me.
Oh, of course. Now, eh?
Oh my. Nothing, no bullshit like that.
Oh, yeah.
That is pretty bad.
That is pretty bad. But I guess one final thing we should say before we end this video is we brought all these games up today, which is only 3 out of the many other Tales games that was released, because I think for many of us, this is kind of one of the reasons why making this video was important, is because at the end of the day, we got 2 really cool games, Tales of Symphonia and Dawn of the New World. These are games that, especially for Symphonia, and I think you guys, if you have not had a chance to play a Tales game, this is the time to pick up some really cool ones on top of 2 classic ones, as well as some of the ones released on the PS3 and of course the Xbox 360 with Vesperia. This is it. This is the time, guys, especially with Xillia 2 coming out. That was actually another thing we didn't mention. We did mention Xillia 2, but we didn't mention the fact that it's coming out this year, which I guess if you want a really super long epic 2 game storyline, and that's another reason you probably want to play Xillia 1 right now for first time out there, is it's got a pretty in-depth story. Graces is just 1 game, but this is a continuation to the first game. So any final words from you guys?
If you want to become a Tales fan, get a PS3. That is pretty much where all the Tales games are. Tales of Graces F, Tales of Xillia 1, 2, Tales of Symphonia HD Chronicles. That is a ton of Tales games. Most of the Tales games are all on the PS3. So if you're really interested in being a Tales fan, you don't have a PS3, you might want to consider grabbing one.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all those words were basically what I was going to say. The Tales games, yeah, they're all on the PS3, and they're all the great ones too. Xillia, Graces, and Symphonia Chronicles, which are also, that's 2 great games in 1 disc. You're basically stealing. You're getting $60 game.
Essentially, when you think about it, what is these games, like 40-hour games each, if not more?
At least you're getting a lot of hours of content. I mean, each game, like Graces, took me like 55 hours. Xillia only took me like 30, but still, Symphonia 1 took me like 70. It's just a lot of hours. You have to have no life to beat all these games.
Not only that, but you have to also take into consideration that these are games that, if you're a completionist, getting all the trophies is going to take an insane amount of time commitment.
Can you imagine how difficult some of these trophies might be to get in these games? I can't imagine. I'm just curious about that.
It's nuts.
I think we should say the other games that got localized as well, if they want to broaden their horizon on the Tales series as well. Tales of the Abyss is on the PS2 and 3DS. Legendaria is on the PS2. Oh yeah, Vesperia is on the 360, but it's also on the PS3 if you want to buy the Japanese version. Destiny and Tales of Destiny 2, which is Eternia, but then got renamed Destiny 2 because of copyright issues, is on the PS1.
Tales of Eternia got ported to the PSP, but that was only released in PAL regions.
Which is in English, by the way, so that is playable if you want to import that.
Fantasia as well, which is the Game Boy Advance version, though I heard that not really that good.
Yeah, we're not even going to go on that one. Let's move away from that game.
Radiant Mythology, which is on the PSP, which it isn't memorable. That's what I'm going to say.
Well, it's a crossover game. I mean, what do you expect?
And like I said, at the end of the day, there are going to be games in any series of games that are probably going to have some ones that aren't as good as others. At the end of the day, do we still like the Tales games?
Hell yeah.
My second favorite series, with Fire Emblem being my favorite series.
We've covered a lot. Even if it's not a review of you guys was looking forward to, don't worry, because Shintai Reviews has reviewed a few Tales games. I'm not mistaken, right?
I've reviewed Tales of Graces. I've reviewed Legendia with Sword and Forest. I also reviewed Vesperia with Peter. I've reviewed Xillia. I've reviewed Symphonia. So yeah, there's quite a bit of Tales-ness on my channel.
I will even one step better with that. I will even post those reviews on this particular video so that the guys here can see that if they want to go and check out those reviews to maybe get a secondary opinion if there are games other than the ones we talked about in this video that they want to try out for the first time. There you go, guys. In a nutshell, thank you for joining me on the first, I guess, episode of Let's Talk on my channel, where hopefully we can do a second episode of some other games down the road. And of course, I do want to apologize about some of the things that's kind of still worked out in progress in terms of things not being quite there yet in terms of segments and how we're going to split things up. But I do hope to refine those in future videos. So thank you guys for joining me on the episode of Let's Talk. I'm Forrest along with Swart, Shintai, and Peter. I'm Forrest, and I'll talk to you guys later.